Well, where do I start? Everyone in here likes to travel, I suppose. Raise your hand. Do you like to travel? Yes. Okay. So our program is basically Black Sea Sustainable Rural Tourism Program. But I don't like the word tourism. You know what tourism reminds me of? Tourism reminds me of a schedule, that I have to get up for breakfast, that I have to get on the bus, that I have to go where people tell me to go, and then I have to leave when they tell me to leave, regardless of whether I'm interested or not. We prefer the word travel, and we prefer the word traveler, although we'll use the word tourist because sometimes you have to mix the words. But a traveler doesn't necessarily have a schedule, is interested in learning about where they're traveling to. They may not have a schedule. They may arrive at a community and decide, you know, this is not bad. I think I'll stay here for a couple of days, instead of, I was thinking of just passing through. So there is a difference. And we are not supporters of mass tourism. And that's how this program is structured. So, we're going to try and cover very quickly, because you don't want to necessarily listen to me. I want you to hear from Alexander, because this is, frankly, more important. But we're going to talk about how the idea of the program arose, why we picked the Black Sea region, the aims, our aims, objectives, and approaches, what makes us different, what are the results going to be, and what are we doing now? This is sustainable travel. We really believe that travel is a force for good. Travel is important. It brings people together. It builds understanding. It builds bridges. And as part of the travel story, we want stories to be told. It's a learning experience. It's buildings versus people. You don't necessarily, a building doesn't tell you anything. You can't have a conversation with a building. But if you go to a community and you travel and you talk to the people there, you'll find that they will open up more. They will show you things that aren't on the schedule. And you'll learn more, and they'll learn from you as well. So how did it begin? All right, well, I have to give some credit. I was paid to do this back in 2003 by the Eurasia Foundation, and we were having trouble giving away money for economic development. It's harder to give away money than you might think. So we allocated $35,000 worth of grants, and it was a 6-month program, and at the end of that program, there were 4 new small ecotourism ventures built, and 40 jobs were created. Now, frankly, that's pretty good value for the money. All of these organizations, by the way, are still operating from 2003. So, in 2010, we decided to have a new program. I was no longer with the Eurasia Foundation. We needed something to do. In 2010, we developed a regional program. And we wanted it to be in rural areas, and we wanted to emphasize sustainability. And we picked Ukraine, Turkey, and Georgia. And this entire program is built on private funding. The people in Veselka Company and in SRDI contributed their own funds in order to start this program. The concept really is a social enterprise venture, and it aims at community development through an integrated regional sustainable tourism system. All those words are important. And social enterprises are important because SRDI is a nonprofit, but it's a special type of nonprofit, and it has to make money. So we decided a regional community integration under a single visual banner that symbolizes quality is our primary goal. Why is it community-based? I mean, why don't we just go out and find hotel accommodations or small houses and tell people, okay, come join the program? Well, because we believe community-based systems offer better opportunities to develop economically. There's ownership and benefits for everyone in the community. And I heard that today because there are many cross-cutting issues. Our own criteria have requirements for waste disposal. We have criteria for water use. We have criteria for gender equality and for youth. So that if everyone works together rather than compete one house to another, we feel the whole community can benefit. And that raises the satisfaction level of life in the community. It also gives the opportunity for people to preserve their local cultures and protect their environment from degradation. Why is it regional? Well, we don't want to live in a bubble. These are shared experiences. It creates diversified products that can attract travelers. It also reduces seasonality, and it helps develop best practices. Sustainability. It's always been a very difficult word. Nobody knows what it means. There are about 1 million definitions of sustainability. They all basically seem to say the same thing. But what we look for is, in the word sustainability, is the protection and preservation of the culture and environment for future generations. And that's what the community has to work for. Again, why the Black Sea? Well, the Black Sea is the perfect environment for all forms of sustainable, responsible tourism, whether it's in Turkey, in Georgia, or Ukraine. There's an enormous historical heritage surrounding the Black Sea. People have been living around the Black Sea and creating civilizations for 3,000 years. So there's a lot to see. There is a mixture of unique cultures in each country and even within each country, but they all have a shared history. Finally, it is one of the most sensitive environmental areas in the world. And we all read about that in the papers. We read about toxic blooms in the Black Sea. We read about the drop in the fisheries. We know how sensitive it is. So that's why we picked the Black Sea. It was a good place to start. What do we want to do? We want to increase the number and quality of travelers. We hear that from the communities we visit. You know, they want more travelers, but they want better travelers. It's hard to define. And many communities, for example, in Turkey, will define quality travelers as people who stay longer and spend more money. But we include that. Yes, we want them to stay longer. We want them to become more involved with the community. But we also want the community to be able to open up to these travelers and not just say, okay, it's time for breakfast, it's time for lunch, it's time for dinner, and this is where you should go, this is where you should go. We also want to support community development and cooperation. We talked about all the cross-cutting issues. This is what the program is about. You bring more travelers in, you're going to need to develop the community in different ways. You're going to need it to develop organically. If you have more travelers, somebody's going to have to bake more bread. You're going to have to grow more crops. Where do you buy your produce in the community? We've told people in Turkey, we don't want you to drive down to the big city on the coast and buy your bread. Why don't you have a bakery here? You have travelers, you have accommodations. They need to buy this stuff. And that is part of our aim, is to encourage that type of economic activity. This will also increase local incomes. And at the end, but not least importantly, It's going to preserve the culture and physical environment because that's what people are coming to see. They don't want to go into the mountains and have a Coke and a hamburger. They really don't. So what our objective is not just expand the travel sector. Anybody can do that. We need to unlock new opportunities for people. And we were talking about youth, trying to retain youth in the community. That's a very difficult job. 2 years ago, I was in a village in Turkey, and that was the first question from the mayor. What can you do to keep youth here, to keep them from going to Izmir, to keep them from going to Istanbul? They were losing everybody because there was nothing to do. Nothing that they considered that they could do, but there are opportunities. There are going to be need for translators. There are going to be need for IT specialists. There's going to be a need for guides. And they have to learn new languages, a particularly difficult problem in Turkey. We also want to increase the skills, speaking of IT and guides, and infrastructure capacity. The infrastructure doesn't have to be fancy. But you do need a road, and because people aren't going to be able to get to you if you don't have a road. Now, that isn't necessarily the job of the community, but the community can start the process. And we want to support partnerships among residents, businesses, local government. Local government has to be involved. We may not want it to be involved, and I've heard people say, oh, the best thing that the government can do is to stay out of our way. Well, we all know that isn't going to happen. Local government everywhere takes an interest in what goes on, and it may be for good reasons or bad reasons, but you better include them somehow and get them on your side. That really has to happen. We also want to raise the awareness level of responsible tourism opportunities, of their economic opportunities, international opportunities, and best practices. What we're going to do is create a cross-border network of flagged, branded, if you will, communities. If you qualify and you become a member, a community becomes a member, then it will be flagged, it will be branded as a Black Sea community. This we use as a symbol of quality. We also want to protect cultural traditions and preserve the environment because, again, in many of the areas where we work, in rural areas, it's the culture and the environment that our travelers come to see. There are business advantages. I know this could be crass, but let's talk about money. We are developing a web portal which will be finished soon, but it creates international visibility. No one has to pay to be on it, but you have to be a member. We promote community experience exchanges, and we've done so between Turkey and Ukraine. We have approved accommodations listed at no cost for each member community. There is an online booking system, and importantly, the traveler is booking. We want travelers to feel part of the community, but we also want them to contribute. An important part is that there is a community development fee. This is funded by the traveler. We don't take any funds out of a community. So there's the multiplier effect, and I mentioned it earlier. There's a multiplier in business. If I have more travelers, I need to buy more products. If I have more travelers, I need to find a way for transportation to bring them to me. People come by train. How do they get from the train to the village? So these are all areas for entrepreneurs to step in and create a new business. Demonstration effect. This is another term, but basically it's, if you do this in one village and it's successful, somebody else is going to try and copy it, and that's good. If it works, it's going to be copied. This is our simplified management structure. We have a secretariat. Secretariat is made up of members of national offices, and we have a national office in Turkey and a national office in Ukraine, and are developing one in Georgia. The representatives of the national office all attend secretariat meetings. Secretariat meetings are held in Istanbul. Unfortunately, I can't go there at the moment. No visas for me. But the secretariat is located there, and SRDI is part of the secretariat. And that's where policy decisions are made for the program. But day-to-day decisions are not. National offices work with what we consider the most important part is the community organization. Communities need to be formally organized. And I'll explain that later. And there are materials in your book. Again, we have strict eligibility criteria. The criteria are based on Global Sustainable Tourism Council criteria. These cover cross-cutting issues, as I mentioned: water quality, safety, the ability to regulate waste. All these items are in the Global Sustainable Tourism Council criteria, which must be adopted by the community. But our whole process begins with a questionnaire, and if you look in your book, you'll see our questionnaire. These are not yes or no answers, but you'll get an idea of the information we're looking for. We didn't build this from scratch. We took good ideas. There's the Silk Road Project, the Mediterranean Blue Flag Program, and Andaman Discoveries, which is in Thailand. What sets us apart? Silk Road, for example. Great project. Cross-border cooperation, cultural aspects, but it only emphasizes music and arts. Mediterranean Blue Flag, another great program. And it covers the Mediterranean, Aegean, and Black Sea regions. But it's restricted to beaches and marinas and water quality. Andaman Discoveries is the closest model to what we've developed, and it's community-based. Again, very important. And excess revenue goes to the communities. We have that in common. The difference is that it's not regional. It's along a small strip of coast in Thailand. So we have cross-border participation, and that's very important for everyone. It's not country-specific, and it's not project-oriented. There are multiple components to this program. So there's no end date. It's permanent. And it affects all aspects of community life to encourage sustainable approaches. So we have social, economic, and environmental results. Social results, community cooperation. We really try and push that hard. Increased level of satisfaction of quality of life in the community. We build gender and accessibility awareness. We give better access to global tourism and industry resources and the experience exchanges to build best practices. Economic, increased job opportunities. Importantly, the traveler spending stays in the community. Do you know that in mass travel, the amount of money that stays within the community you're visiting is 5%. Everything else goes out. That's an important figure to remember because we're trying to reverse that so that close to 75% stays in the community. And that's important for community organizations. So there's an improved economic activity, there's more small business formation, and there are also opportunities for micro-lending. Environmentally, because of our criteria, we want to protect the environment. There has to be an improved awareness of not damaging the environment, and this comes back to what was talked about with waste disposal, which is a good opportunity for the cross-sectorial cooperation. So what have we been doing? Well, we've been at this for several years now, but it's really gotten going in 2015, where we did experience exchange workshops in Turkey As you can see, our Ukrainian delegation there. Alexander will remember that. In 2016, we had our annual meeting and workshop in Holopristan. Turkish delegation came, the government in Holopristan, the government in the Oblast, and the government representatives from Turkey were also involved. So that becomes important. It creates buy-in, and that's very important for everyone. So, I'm happy to take any questions. There are materials in your book, but I want to have Alexander give a presentation to show you how it's done on the ground. And let me say one thing. We are not responsible for Alexander's success. He was doing this before we ever became involved, although we've known each other for quite some time. But this is his success, and his type of community is the type of community that we want to get involved in our program.
Дякую, пане Річард. Я би хотіла підкреслити ще раз, що в матеріалах є ось кілька аркушів, так, від програми сталого розвитку туризму сільського у Причорномор'ї. І тут є аплікаційна форма. І фактично, Mr. Richard, do I understand correctly that each community that is present today in our hub can potentially become participant of the program?
That's correct. The first step, as I mentioned, is completing the questionnaire. We make a determination from there at what level the community's experience, what level the community experience is at, and then from there we move forward. You always communicate with the community. There is no absolute rejection. We need to be able to see what a community can offer. And another important point, which is really not in the, we don't define communities by administrative boundaries. There can be several small villages located together that can form one community. In Turkey, we have a community in Kastamonu province, but the community consists of 2 villages that are 20 kilometers apart. It didn't make sense to have 2 separate communities when they're that close and everyone knew each other. One community had 2,400 people, another had 1,800 people. They all know each other. So it's important to recognize that our definition of a community is inclusive. And what we want to be able to do when you're answering the questionnaire is to really think about the answers. The answers are very important. They're not yes or no answers.